This is Black and White Makes Gray, a memoir of an interracial childhood by Judith Davidson. Chapter 5. I awoke in the middle of the night to someone playing the piano downstairs. It sounded like strong fingers rippling across keys, landing cleanly on chords that then dissembled into notes again. A trumpet opened a mournful rift, powerful in its restrained round sound. A man's voice chimed in, low, singing a mournful song, the words of which were lost between the floors. I remembered now that we lived with a jazz musician, and I would soon learn that sometimes he played late at night with his bandmates. Men who arrived at odd hours, leaving a smell of Swedish smoke lingering long after they left. That was not cigarettes and not the incense my mother often lit in her bedroom. The piece ended, and I heard someone clapping. I thought it was probably my mother, serving as the sole audience member. Then there was some rumbling like talking. Chairs moved and feet shuffled. The front door opened, and I could feel the jar to the house as it shut. An engine started, and I heard a car drive away into the night. Why did we have to leave the big green house, I wondered. Even though my dad was moving to Seattle, I had asked Mom why we also had to move. Mom said a different neighborhood would be better for us, that there would be less prejudice, and people wouldn't be so focused on money and status like they were on Portland Heights. When Mom talked about how bad Portland Heights was, I almost felt like she thought it was racist to like the house and neighborhood in which we had lived. If you had asked me how I felt, even at a time like this, when the worst fears were eating away at me, I would have told you simply, I'm fine. That is all I had to offer for feelings. Fine. I didn't think I was fine, but I also didn't think I was allowed to say more. Expressing anything other than fine would have brought the world down on my head and opened a yawning hole that wasn't supposed to be there. And most of the time, I didn't know I contained more. Feelings had to be identified, to be named, and spoken of to gain depth. And that wasn't something with which I had much experience. Note to Evan. What did you feel during this period? Was it strange to be suddenly in Northwest Portland with an intense white woman who appeared to adore you? Did you love her like she loved you? When had the two of you made plans for becoming not only a couple, but also a family? I've never been sure how much was planned and how much simply happened. I've never been sure if the two of you really wanted us. I can't believe you left it all, said Bill, a tall, slender, young white man wearing a blue and white ankle-length dashiki. He blew cigarette smoke out through his nose as he wiggled his feet on the dry ground. Bill was not long out of high school, footloose and cruising the gay scene, trying to be a painter, drinking a lot, and taking a lot of drugs. Introduced to Mom by one of our former babysitters from when we had lived in the big greenhouse, he and Mom had quickly become fast friends. Although almost 20 years his senior, it seemed like my mother had found in Bill a kind of soulmate, a different bond than she had with Mr. Porter, but equally important. When Bill stopped by, Mom would open a bottle of wine, Bill would pull out his cigarettes, and the long conversations would begin. Done, said my mother. No more of that bullshit. And she tossed her black hair as she shrugged like a diva. I winced at Mom's use of the bad word, and she shot me a look as if to say, surprised? Don't be. The three of us were sitting on Mom's large black embroidered shawl spread out on the weedy, uncut grass in the backyard behind the old Victorian. It was itchy where the sharp, broken ends of grass poked through the aging fabric. As was often the case when the two of them got together, they were quickly making their way through a big bottle of cheap Chianti. There are a lot of people who are locked into it, Bill said. Yeah, locked in with the key thrown away, Mom quipped, looking down her nose at him meaningfully. And she took another swig from the white Chinese teacup she was using for a wine glass. Not me, she went on. I could be gypsy, you know. Ooh, do tell. Yep, I'm Irish, but you see the black hair? There's a good chance that there might have been some contact with the Spanish during the Armada. Makes sense, Bill said. And then there were the Tinkers traveling through Europe and to Ireland. I mean, I think you could see how it could be. Who knows who we are? Nearby, Randy and Virginia were working on a massive construction project, digging channels, then filling them up with water from a hose, adding small boats, and gradually flooding the backyard with something that looked like it might overtake the port of Portland in a few centuries. One of the benefits of living in a downtrodden rental, we had quickly discovered, was the lack of rules about how to treat the premises. Whoever we are, we're certainly not going to make it in Portland, Oregon. That's for sure. Real artists are not recognized in Portland, Oregon. They are so backwards here. San Francisco or New York, yes, but not in Portland. I'd be fine with Paris or Mexico, for that matter. They don't get it here. No, they don't. As I listened to Mom and Bill discuss they, I wondered if Mr. Porter's the man and Mom and Bill's they were the same thing. Well, we saw plenty of Bill, and there was always an influx of Mr. Porter's musician friends. I wondered where my mother's many female friends had gone. As soon as we moved away from the big green house, they seemed to have disappeared. I missed those smart, funny women who volunteered in the different organizations with Mom. I wondered what had changed. Had Mr. Porter's presence made them leery of coming by? Or was it Mom who was hiding from them? When we lived in the big green house, it had seemed that we were in the midst of a war called civil rights. I assumed the war was still raging, but now it felt like the troops and tanks had moved to a different arena. I didn't know if the war would return to this front or neglect us to rove among other regions and peoples. Just then, Mr. Porter appeared on the back porch carrying his trumpet case. "Ready to go?" called Mom. He nodded and went back inside. "Come on," Mom called to all of us standing up. "We're going to go hear some jazz in the park. Evan's going to sit in with some of his friends." We all piled into the old blue Chevrolet station wagon with the big tail fins, which my mother had retained in the separation from my father. Mom drove, Mr. Porter sat beside her, and the rest of us, including Bill, jammed together in the back seat. I was next to the window and pressed my forehead against the glass as she eased the car forward, turned at the corner, and made her way through the lower part of Northwest Portland, across the Broadway Bridge, and into North Portland. The further we drove, the fewer white people were to be seen in cars or on the sidewalk. In Portland, realtors didn't show white people houses in the districts that were designated for black people, and vice versa. Certain sections of the north and northeast neighborhoods were known as strictly black neighborhoods. Crossing the bridge across the Willamette River and entering those neighborhoods was physically how you crossed the border from black to white. We were now living in the land between white and black. In Portland, Oregon of 1966, there were few places where one could pass safely from one side to the other, black to white or white to black, or make friends with and interact without notice with people from the other side. We were on our way to becoming a new sort of species, an interracial family. As a 12-year-old from a white, upper-middle-class family, I had no idea how unprepared I was and who would be able to help me make sense of it. Mom led us across the grass toward the bandstand, her black embroidered shawl wrapped around her shoulders and trailing down to her feet. She was also carrying a brightly colored striped bag that in our family had always been referred to as the raffia bag. On car trips, it held Mom's homemade cookies, chocolate chip, snickerdoodle, and sometimes ginger snap, coloring books, or maybe even a package of new crayons. Once there was an Etch-a-Sketch where you could write on a cellophane sheet attached to a cardboard backing, then pull it up and the writing would disappear and you could write again. We followed behind her like a band of elves, while Mr. Porter, carrying his trumpet case, followed behind us. She found us a spot and laid her large shawl on the grass. I looked back and saw that Mr. Porter had stopped to talk to someone. A young man with a stunningly large afro, holding a set of drumsticks in his hand while they talked. He nodded and smiled at Mr. Porter, at the same time thumping a rhythm onto his palm with the sticks. "Catch you later, Ronnie," I heard Mr. Porter say. "Catch you later," I repeated in my head. It was different from the way I talked. I would have said, "See you later." It was fascinating to me how differently people spoke the same language. I knew my grandfather from the South used words like crawdad instead of crayfish, or he called a creek a crick. Some of his language sounded like that of the black people I'd heard speak, but it wasn't exactly the same. I didn't think my grandfather would say, "Catch you later." And why did the black people who lived up north, still have a different way of talking? I wondered if it had something to do with slavery or the languages black people spoke earlier in Africa. But we hadn't learned about any of that in school, so I had no idea. In French class, my teacher had talked a little about the history of French and English, but none of my teachers had ever talked about any languages beyond that. I wondered where I could learn about it. Mom and Bill hadn't brought the bottle of Chianti with them, but they still had their wine attitude with them, a mood I translated as, "Hey, aren't we cool?" My mother was smiling with satisfaction. Mr. Porter sat down next to her, stretching out his legs on the grass. As I took in the scene at the park, I noted who was white and who was black and how they were sitting, connected or not. Scattered across the lawn were groups of people, both black and white, and we were one of a handful of mixed-race groupings. Before my mother moved us into the old Victorian with this Mr. Porter, I would not have paid attention to white and black in this way, but now I could not ignore it. Virginia, who had been playing with Janet, came and dropped into Mom's lap. Mom leaned lightly into Mr. Porter, looking up at him and laughing as she wrapped her arms around my sister, and he nodded back at her. I could not remember Mom and Dad looking at each other like that, ever. What I remembered most recently was my mother trying not to look at my father whenever he was in the room, doing anything not to make eye contact, her body rigid and tense whenever he was nearby. Although she was happier now, I was not sure I liked it, because I wasn't sure where it left me. "Judy," said Mom, "I've got something in the raffia bag for us. Can you take it out?" I looked in the bag to find a pink bakery box. Carefully, I lifted the box out of the bag and set it down in front of Mom. Then I extracted a kitchen knife and napkins from the bag. Mom opened the bag to reveal a German chocolate cake. "My favorite!" I squealed with excitement. They were on sale at Kino's, so I picked up one this morning. Call it an early birthday cake, although I know we've still got a long ways to go before September 21st. "My birthday too," said Virginia. "Mine is the day after Judy's birthday, and I want my own birthday." "Yes, you'll have your own birthday," Mom promised. "Evan and Bill, I don't think you know the story of the German chocolate cake," said Mom, rolling her eyes. "Oh, no," I groaned, knowing what was coming. Mom moved into her storytelling mode, and she was already giggling with anticipation. Janet, Randy, and Virginia knew the story and were looking at me expectantly. Judy loves German chocolate cake. I mean, she loves German chocolate cake. So for her third or fourth birthday, was it? That's what she wanted, and that's what she got, said Mom, drawing Mr. Porter and Bill into the laughter as her anticipation began to catch. We'd had the cake with the candles, and after everyone got a piece of a cake, there was just one slice left, so I took it out to the carport and put it in the dog's dish for Brownie. I loved that dog, said Randy. You shouldn't feed dogs cake, said Janet, frowning. Oh, Brownie needed a piece, Mom insisted. But a little while later, I couldn't find Judy anywhere. We looked all over the house. I began to be afraid that something had happened to her. Finally, I decided to go outside, and I turned on the light and opened the door to the carport. That's when I found her. She was sitting by the dog's bowl, eating the last piece of German chocolate cake, Mom squealed. Mr. Porter's eyebrows shot up with surprise, and he looked at me with an expression of alarm. Bill was doubled over, and Randy, Janet, and Virginia were now laughing too. Mom, stop talking so loud, I hissed. People will start looking at us. I sighed heavily. Yes, I did. I admit it. It was the last piece of cake, and it was German chocolate. If I had to do it over again, I would still choose to eat that piece of cake. I don't want German chocolate from my birthday cake, said Virginia. I eyed Mr. Porter and couldn't read his face. He seemed amused by Mom's story, but was he wondering what he'd gotten himself into? Was he embarrassed to know he was living with a person who was willing to eat German chocolate cake off the dog's dish? The thing was, this was my cake and this was my story. The two were tightly tied to my family identity. Whether my parents were married or divorced, German chocolate cake would always remind me of who I was and where I came from, and what it meant to be part of a family. The young man with the drumsticks walked by and said, Hey, Porter, join us for this one. Mr. Porter nodded, picked up his trumpet case, and headed to the bandstand, following the young man who was still drumming up and down his thigh. They made their way through the band members to the drum set at the back of the stage, where Ronnie took his seat and played a fast series of beats on the snare drum to get the attention of the audience. Mr. Porter walked to the side of the band, set his case on a chair, opened it, and drew out his trumpet, blowing soundlessly as he got ready to join the group. Several members of the band nodded at him in recognition and welcome. This impressed me, as I realized he might be someone who was known and admired in the world of jazz musicians. Ronnie spoke into the microphone near his drums. Joining us for the next number is Evan Porter on the trumpet. We clapped with the others in the crowd, and Mr. Porter nodded to the audience. Some of you may know him as a piano player, but trumpet was his first instrument, Ronnie explained to the crowd. Then Ronnie counted to the group, and they started playing in unison. But at the same time, it wasn't unison. I don't know that much about jazz, and this was one of those weird pieces that didn't sound anything like a song you would sing. I was coming to realize that there were different kinds of jazz, and the kind Mr. Porter played and liked the best was very different than the kind of jazz you would find in a restaurant where people were talking, or from a big band playing for people who wanted to dance. The jazz he liked was this all-over-the-place kind of stuff, a music that said, listen hard and try to find the melody if you can kind of jazz. I was confused and not sure why Mr. Porter and his musician friends thought this kind of jazz was the best. At one point in the piece, Mr. Porter stepped forward and played his trumpet alone as the other musicians kept time in the background. Why does he play alone? I asked my mother. He's improvising a solo. What does that mean? He's making it up as he goes. You're not supposed to do that. I don't know, my mother said and shrugged. You better ask him about it. It was a long piece, and when it was over, Mr. Porter picked up his trumpet and headed back to our spot. At that point, we had packed everything up and were ready to go. "What was that man doing when he was slapping on his body, making rhythm to the music?" Randy asked. "Ham bones," said Mr. Porter. "That's cool. Can you do it?" "Yeah. Will you show me?" "Yeah, I can. Can you carry the trumpet for me?" Randy took the trumpet case from him as Mr. Porter reached down to pick up Virginia, who was leaning sleepily against Mom, barely able to walk. Mom carried the raffia bag. Great, I thought. As if the telling of the German chocolate cake story wasn't enough. Now Mr. Porter was carrying Virginia, and Randy was carrying Mr. Porter's trumpet. Everyone would know he was with us, or we were with him. Until that moment, I had hoped Mr. Porter's presence was something people wouldn't notice. Now there was truly no denying it. He was with us and we were with him. It was almost like we were a family. And I resented that no one had asked me if I wanted to join it. I mean, I knew you didn't get to choose your families, but the feeling that my life was being changed without anyone talking to me was feeling increasingly wrong, almost insulting. Mom could put all the treats she wanted in that raffia bag, but that didn't make her a good mom. Not in the important ways, but it would take me years to weed that out and understand it. Thank you to Westford Community Access Television for providing facilities and production support, all of which made this podcast possible.